In 1875, a letter traveled from the heart of Africa to the streets of London. A royal summons inked by Henry Morton Stanley, but signed in the name of Kabaka I, King of Buganda. Published to the world, it read like an invitation, a call for missionaries to bring the light of the gospel to the fabled kingdom on Africa's inland sea. To the British public, Buganda became a vision, an emerald city at the end of the continent, awaiting salvation, opportunity, and enlightenment. Adventurers and evangelists dreamed of transforming its people, believing themselves to be rescuers, bearers of faith and civilization for a land they pictured as lost in shadow. But the road to Buganda was no golden brick path. It was treacherous, tangled in the politics and power struggles of African kingdoms. Here, every alliance came at a cost, and every outsider was a guest, bound by rules they barely understood. Two missionaries learned this the hard way. Ukerewe Island, December 7th, 1877. Lieutenant George Shergold Smith and Thomas O'Neill came seeking passage north. They needed a doe to cross Lake Victoria to reach Buganda. But in securing it, they stepped into a feud between an Arab trader and King Lukonge of the Kerewe people, a dispute over unpaid timber and deceitful promises. When the king demanded the trader surrender, they refused. Worse, they agreed to take his wives and children off the island. In Lukonge's eyes, that was an act of war. By the afternoon, the missionaries lay dead on the shore, speared after their ammunition had ran dry. Their deaths were not the result of faith itself, but of a fatal misreading of politics in a land that played by its own rules. And yet, their fate didn't deter others. If anything, it hardened the resolve of those who saw Buganda as a spiritual prize worth any risk. One man in particular felt that call. James Hannington. To him, the road, dangerous and bloodstained as it was, had to be walked again. His story would not begin in Buganda, but it would end at its doorstep. Turquoise water, white sand, tropical sun. Zanzibar. Yeah, the same island people fly to today for honeymoons and beach resorts. But back in the 19th century, this was the beating heart of the Indian Ocean trade. Cloves, ivory, gold, and most tragically, slaves were sold here. The monsoon winds carried merchants here from Arabia, Persia, India, and even Europe. Picture the docks crowded with men shouting prices in Arabic, Hindi, English, Swahili. And behind it all, fields upon fields of clove plantations worked by the Swahili, but also by thousands of slaves dragged from the interior. Kingdoms like Buganda, Bunyoro, Karagwe, the various Nyamwezi states all fed this system. Buganda in particular was a favorite of the Arabs, and this was because the Kabaka had a centralized kingdom, a reliable system with which he was able to give them what they needed. He had no trouble raiding his neighbors for captives and ivory. The coast didn't have to chase it. Buganda just delivered. And then came the British, demanding they end slavery. The Sultan signed their treaties, but they were going to need a lot more than treaties to stop this. And it wasn't until 1897 when they were able to put an end to it, after Zanzibar became a British protectorate. But even before then, they'd made sure of one thing, that they'd become one of the most powerful figures in Zanzibar politics. So when James Hannington landed in 1882, guess who was waiting? Not the Swahili, not the Sultan's men, but Colonel Miles, the acting British consul, who marched Hannington straight into the Sultan's audience. My friends, that was not a privilege given to anyone. Missionaries may have thought that they were only there to preach, but for sure, the shadow of empire definitely walked with them. So as leader of the expedition to Buganda, James Hannington got to meet the leader of the Spice Islands. The very next day, they crossed to the mainland and landed at Sadani, which is today inside Sadani National Park, or probably close to it. There's less information about the town than the national park, but what I can tell you is that it's very beautiful. I mean, you have elephants that sometimes wander onto the beach. The water is sky blue with various shades as you look further out. You might even come across a lion drinking from a waterhole close by as monkeys swing in the trees. Sadani National Park is where the savannah meets a tropical beach. Well, all I'm saying, it is definitely on my list to visit. But back then, that was where caravans began, or at least one of the places. And on June 30th, 1882, the expedition was assembled. Led by Charles Stokes and James Hannington, 7 European missionaries began the journey. Charles Stokes wasn't originally a part of this mission, and we aren't told why he joined it when they met him in Zanzibar. But given his reputation, it's clear that Stokes was the best person to guide this group of freshly green missionaries to the motherland. Charles Stokes started out as an Irish missionary, but soon became a guide leading caravans selling ivory and guns, which, if you ask me, is an interesting life path for someone who initially went there to save supposed lost souls. But Stokes did very well in this business, until he met his end in Congo when the Belgians hung him for inciting rebellion, causing an international affair. That was known as the Stokes Affair. In any case, he was very experienced with the routes to get to these kingdoms, making him an exceptional choice. 6 of the missionaries were being sent to back up the Church Missionary Society, or CMS, missionary station in Buganda, which at the time had only one man, Alexander Mackay. Why, you might ask? Buganda was not easy. And the missionaries who had been sent there after that letter from King Mutesa and H.M. Stanley had all but one given up and left. So by 1880, Alexander Mackay found himself alone, isolated, and dealing with multiple oppositions in the form of the Arabs, the chiefs of Buganda, and the French Catholic priests from the White Fathers Missionary Society. Which meant this expedition was extremely important. And for James Hannington, it was a calling. No. He described it as a longing, one he didn't feel he deserved, but was very clear had been gnawing at him since news of the deaths of Shergold Smith and Thomas O'Neill in 1878. He wrote in his journal, open quotes, 8G came to see me, and to my surprise told me he longed to be a missionary. I told him that I longed to be one too. Smith and O'Neill's deaths and some papers I had read had set me longing. Close quotes. James Hannington would write plenty of times about this longing, and yet he felt that he didn't deserve to go. You see, missionaries like Hannington often echoed biblical figures like Moses, Isaiah, John the Baptist, all who said, "I'm not worthy." This humility before God sat alongside the irresistible heroic appeal of mission. To go to Africa meant to see and experience new things. They were adventurers, one who would return with many stories to tell. But you can't really say that out loud now, can you? You gotta finesse it. You have to be small in yourself, yet great in service. Catch my meaning? Now, in addition to the 7 Europeans, 500 porters, tent boys, and others were hired. 500. That sounds like a huge number, but there were caravans of double, even triple that size. And the reason is that the road ahead from Zanzibar to Buganda was no joke. We're talking over 700 miles, 5 to 8 months of walking, narrow roads, no wagons. Every single thing had to be carried. Food, tents, gifts for chiefs, clothes, books, even the sermons they were going to use. And no, they couldn't just slap packs on donkeys or horses. The Sesafly saw to that with sleeping sickness. Humans got it too, of course, but we could resist much better. And so the work landed on human backs, the backs of porters who were mostly called Wangwana, freedmen from the coast, and the Wanyamwezi, the people of the moon from northern Tanzania. The Nyamwezi were legendary traders. They had walked these routes long before missionaries showed up. They were the real engine of these caravans. But make no mistake, this was brutal work. And as they began their journey to the land of Mutesa, the porters marched barefoot over sharp stones, the sun burning them by day, the moon watching them by night. If you slowed down, you were left behind. And being left behind could mean death. One man they found him later, dead, because he was ambushed by robbers. And then there was the water, or what passed for it. Black with rotting plants and animal corpses, sometimes wriggling with tadpoles. Imagine how that feels in your mouth. Okay, that just sounds wrong. And sometimes when they boiled the water, they could find a dead frog floating in it. Extra protein, anyone? You know, it kind of made me think how the French missionaries must have felt about that when they passed through. I mean, they ate frogs. Cosses de Grand Lion? I'm saying that wrong for sure, but frog legs, basically. But in any case, for the porters, they probably didn't even care anymore, because that's what had to be done. And this was part of their job. The caravan pressed inland, following the Wami River. The Wami River is a watercourse that meanders through today's areas of Morogoro and Pwani regions of Tanzania before emptying into the sea. It was a natural guide towards the stopovers of the interior. Hannington couldn't help noticing its beauty. Huge trees climbing to the sky, creepers twisting everywhere, and a kingfisher flashing its colors overhead as it sang. Locals had even built a bridge of vines across the water. But as the caravan neared a village, they found that the people had vanished. Hannington wrote, open quotes, "On arriving at the village, we found that a false report that we were exceedingly hostile had reached the natives. Accordingly, they had fled pell-mell, leaving behind them nothing but empty huts. In cases of this kind, it is extremely difficult to restrain the men from plundering the sugar plantations and banana trees, for they must have something to eat. Then if they steal, the natives naturally say that the report was right, and that the white men are robbers. Close quotes. What you have here is a self-reinforcing cycle of misunderstanding and fear. For the people, they might have been unsure whether or not these white men were slavers or not. Remember, this was a time when slavery was a huge business. Caravans filled with slaves from the interior would make their way to the coast. But I don't think it was just about the color of their skin, because most of the group were Africans. I think the color of their skin was just a very visible marker of difference and unfamiliarity. That, coupled with their huge numbers, must have appeared intimidating while also conjuring up PTSD for villages who had been subjected to raids of every kind. So they fled, which put the caravan in a bad position of having no one to trade with. Porters would trade their allowance in exchange for food at well-known stops along the caravan routes. If there was no one to trade with, their only option was to pillage. Otherwise, who knew when they would get food again? Hence, a self-reinforcing cycle of fear and misunderstanding. The area they were moving in was very swampy. The Wami River flowed or slowed down in low-lying areas, and because of it, water spread out instead of draining away. That left the area swampy, with marshes and stagnant pools that made travel along the caravan routes tough. At night, it was gorgeous. Fireflies flickering like stars. But whatever beauty you were enjoying was quickly stolen from you by the mosquitoes. As you know, mosquitoes thrive in stagnant pools. As they pass through, that's when the fever started, which are most likely caused by malaria. On July 21st, 1882, they reached the CMS mission station in Mamboya, perched on a mountainside about 150 miles from the coast and 3,000 feet up. Today, Mamboya is part of Chilosa district in Morogoro region. Reverend Ashe, who was there with them, wrote that the station sat high on the hill, looking down over fertile valleys with mountains stacked one after another until they faded into the blue distance. After days of swamps and heat, this place must have felt like a relief. Cool air, wide views, and a few days to catch their breath before pushing further inland. And Reverend Ashe tells us that they reluctantly left. The caravan were dreading this road to the next stop. It would be about 50 miles before they arrived. Meandering along rocky mountains, it was difficult terrain. Antelope darted across the path. They came across puff adders, heard hyenas laughing at night. Hannington himself fell into a pit, a miracle he didn't break any bones. And his nephew, Sir Gordon, got extremely sick. He was struck by fever and was struggling to move. Until, at that moment, they were attacked. Hannington and Gordon heard bullets whiz by. Immediately, James Hannington thought it was the infamous Ruga Ruga, mercenaries known for their guerrilla tactics when attacking caravans. The Ruga Ruga were vicious. They were composed of the Ngoni people, descendants of the Zulu from South Africa, and Nyamwezi fighters and ex-slaves. But the Ruga Ruga were not the only group to be feared on caravan routes. There were others like the Hehe people, their name which apparently comes from their war cry that sent shivers down the spines of anyone who heard them. They were so deadly that by the end of that decade in the 1880s, some routes were completely abandoned by not just the caravans, but the people who lived there due to their presence. To the Europeans, all were Ruga Ruga mercenaries. Hannington feared them for good reason. They had reputations for raiding and killing without hesitation. He would later meet their leader, dubbed the African Napoleon. His name? Mirambo. But no, not this time. This time, it was the Wahumba, a cattle-raiding people who were probably eventually absorbed into their neighbors by the 20th century. Still, the fear was so real, the caravan bundled together, watching from all sides as they double-marched day and night to reach safety. And on July 28th, they finally arrived. Mpwapwa. Mpwapwa was an important stopping place for caravans going into the interior. It was well known as the last place to obtain good food and water before proceeding to the Marenga Mkali, which meant bitter water. Hence why the CMS missionaries set up a mission house in that area. It was situated on a ridge, gazing out at plains dotted with buffalo and antelope. Today, Mpwapwa is the capital of its district in Dodoma region. Stopping there should have been a relief, but contrary to expectations, they found that food was scarce. Other caravans had already stripped the markets. Worse, smallpox was raging in nearby camps. Stay too long, and they risked death by disease. This put them in a very difficult position for the journey. And so after 3 days, they packed up again and pushed deeper into the heart of the continent. Join me again next time for the continuation of this story on those who came before us.